A verifiable truth. Yeah, wisdom teachings. This is also Dharma. Any other thoughts, or is that kind of it?
A television show.
Yeah, a television show. Yeah, Dharma and Greg. I actually used to live in the old apartment of the actress who played Dharma.
Oh my God.
Side. It's on 87th and 1st. How funny is that? New York.
I grew up Jewish, so there was always a concept that felt similar, which is tikkun olam, and it is the phrase God-given gifts. And Judaism is derived from that, and it means like what you're here to heal the world with. Sometimes it feels like a curse, but it's really like the thing that keeps showing up that is your purpose. Someone said that contributes to your healing.
Yes. So here in the West, people often think of Dharma in an individualistic way. They think it's kind of this finding of one's life's purpose that's unique unto you. So this kind of one perfect thing. And if we could just figure out what it was, it would bring us peace of mind or success or some kind of sustainable happiness. And so this brings up a very important idea when we start to think about Dharma. There are two kinds of Dharma that everyone has. The first is material Dharma, and the second is spiritual Dharma. Material Dharma is very much individualistic, and your material Dharma changes constantly. So right now, my material Dharma is teacher. Later, it will be boyfriend, pizza eater, pet owner. Whatever you're doing, whatever you do, whatever duty you carry out, or whatever attachments other people have to you, the way they perceive you and the way you enact that is Dharma. That's material Dharma. And then spiritual Dharma is all the same for everybody, right? You're one spiritual Dharma, when you're born, very soon after you're born, a kind of longing starts. You want for something more. And this really is a desire to know the truth. And so in our searching to return to the very deepest level of love, what we pick up along the way is an attachment to enjoyment or pleasure. So our spiritual Dharma is just to figure out who we are and what we're made of, and then, yes, to offer that back into this very awake, aware reality. So in order to center your life around something, your basic needs need to be met. So this is why material Dharma is very important. You have to establish kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so that way you can realize higher, more subtle truths. This is material Dharma. But we express the spiritual Dharma, even though it's all the same, in an individual way. Dharma is a commitment to the process of waking up, with the expectancy of total fulfillment. So oftentimes when people begin to search, they don't have the right view orientation. View is super, super important in this searching, because if you undertake this process thinking that you are somehow fundamentally flawed or lacking, you're only ever going to perpetuate this cycle of kind of self-help pop culture fixing of yourself. And the yoga tradition says that who you are is fundamentally whole. It exists in a state of fullness that they call purnatva. So dharma comes from the same root word that means essence or nourishment. So to realize one's dharma is to be eternally nourished. It's to establish oneself in your essence. Dharma is actually built into nature, and it's the flow of life itself. So the way the river flows is dharma. The way the river of life flows is dharma. The process of the universe moving towards the truth, moving towards reality, is dharma. Dharma is the direction that we're going, and paradoxically, it's the place where we already are. The goal is to kind of identify with the higher and finer version of ourself, not to become a kind of skillful or clever ego. Right? So this searching can go a couple of ways. The mind can say, I'll be happy when blank, and then you get really good at arranging your life so that you can fit things into the blank. And so we start to get very, very clever at manipulating the world around us so we get what we want. That isn't moving towards who you really are. That's simply an attachment to pleasure. You start to see the difference just a bit? So you growing is dharma. And it's not always comfortable. But we spend the first half of our lives trying to acquire an identity so we can figure out how to move in the world. And we start to build these kind of long lists of attachments and aversions, or memories, experiences that were either joyful or traumatic, and we decide this is who we are. But the arrow of yoga points to something much more subtle and much fuller. And so the goal, once again, is to identify with that higher self and not the ahamkara, the I am feeling, or the I maker. It's the yogic word, the Sanskrit word ahamkara, for the ego. So we're not trying to get rid of the ego because its entirety of reality is aware. So the idea in yoga philosophy is that the universe is conscious and alive and awareness itself. So your ego is actually helpful because it helps you establish that feeling of I am. So what we want to try and learn to attach ourselves to is something higher and finer than our compulsive craving to just feel good all the time. And you'll find that as you start to realize your essence nature or align with the higher self, you're able to drop your tension and start to move in the direction of life itself. Sometimes we call it flow state. So one of the key points in teasing out material dharma versus spiritual dharma, and trying to lessen the problematic role of the ego, is that your self-image is the biggest obstacle to self-knowledge. Because it's just you compulsively trying to live out this drama or defend this identity based on lists of likes and dislikes. Does this make sense? Okay. So waking up from our ignorance and realizing our essence nature is our dharma, and we're swimming in it, we're totally immersed in it. And what's required of us is to live in a way where we can sense for that. But it's very subtle. It's not something that can be felt very tangibly with the senses. So what's required is that we relax from all of the tensions that we get from being a consumer of our life through the world of the senses. So what's required is a kind of tuning inward so those tensions can be released and digested. And this is why the practices of yoga come into play. So the idea is that you already are God or awareness or love itself. And you have to live in such a way where you can participate consciously in the process of embodying that. So what is this process? There's a great sage of Kashmir Shaivism named Abhinavagupta, and he says, when a person chooses to gradually purify and refine his mental constructs of reality as the means for attaining experiential realization of the true nature of things, then he employs a process of contemplation, which they call bhavana, that presupposes sound reasoning, called satarka, true scriptures, sad agama, and instruction by a true guru, sadguru. So before the real work begins, you need some things. You need a wisdom tradition, a teacher, and sound reasoning. The sound reasoning can be established from engagement with a living wisdom tradition and the presence of a teacher, right? You need time-tested methods for waking up, for pulling your own head out of your ass, and it's really hard to do that yourself. You need to be in close relationship with someone who can tell you that you have spinach in your teeth. And it's only the closest people to you that are really going to tell you, right? The true friend or the teacher. So from having access to the scriptures or wisdom tradition and a teacher, one gets good ideas, and it leads to so if our understanding of reality is misaligned, the teacher and the scriptural tradition or the wisdom tradition can help correct us. They can say, hey, I see you're suffering here. Here's wisdom to move to a more expansive way of being. Or if we're stuck in a contracted way of thinking or being, sometimes the teacher or the tradition pokes or provokes us so that we might break out of our current state of being. There's this idea that sometimes it requires a challenge to change us. So once sound reasoning is established and we've created a real relationship with wisdom teachings, and we receive authentic practices from a time-tested tradition, you can begin deep contemplation and practice as a way to embody wisdom. There's actually a very kind of logical process that lays this out. How do you learn? How do you untangle yourself from being stuck? Right? If you have any amount of stress in your life, you're stuck. So what's required to get unstuck? You have to elevate the quality of your mind in some way so you can solve the problem. So where do you get good ideas from? People who know and time-tested traditions. It's very simple. And so when you're in the presence, when you put yourself in the role of being a student, which is really a role of humility, which we're not very good at all the time, the first step of this is called shravana. You have to listen. It's a process of absorbing wisdom. And the way we're supposed to do that is just realize that we have these long lists of attachments and aversions, and just let them go for some time, right? And in letting them go for some time, you become an open container, right? If the teacup is already full and I'm pouring tea into it, it's just going to run all over the table, right? So you have to leave the familiar for a while so that you can move to a place of being receptive. That obviously requires a couple of things: an effort on your part and the effort of the teacher to create a safe environment. Then the second step, once you've heard the wisdom, it's called manana. It's the yogic process of contemplation, of turning an idea over in your mind over and over again. And even if it doesn't resonate and it doesn't fit like it should, you approach that dissonance with a solutions-focused mind. So the idea is you want to get unstuck. You deeply wish to grow no matter what. And if you deeply wish to grow no matter what, you'll start to work around your aversions, not so that some spiritual platitude or hallmark card about reality will be true for you, but so that you can start to understand what is required for me to actually understand what's being communicated. Because there's only one thing that's really being communicated in the wisdom traditions, and we're all it. The third step of this kind of process is what they call nididhyasana. Nididhyasana is the way of moving to embodiment. So after you've contemplated and meditated, the idea is the wisdom brings about a deep kind of silence. And you recognize that even though this idea came externally, that you have been the embodiment of that wisdom all the time. Right? Dorothy could have gone home at the beginning of the movie. Right? But it took this process of this hearing, this deep contemplation, and then realization. So this is kind of the steps. So and once we come to that place of realization that wisdom exists inside of us, we start to realize that wisdom is at play everywhere. They call this the play of consciousness, or lila. And that we're on a journey to discover our own limitlessness. And it's not so linear. We don't flow in one line. We do a lot of tail chasing, and that's part of it. That's also why the wisdom tradition and the teacher is so important. They can see you wasting all this energy running around in circles, and they can say, here, consider this. It doesn't have to be this way, right? There's a way for you to upshift. So what does it take? Actions that are conducive to waking up. Actions that are in accordance with the flow of life itself. When our desire goes this way and the flow of life goes this way, we suffer. So it's a natural way of life. And the most important thing I hope that you take away from any of this is that you cultivate in your heart a deep desire to grow. So we have an intuitive feeling of naturalness, that overthinking and trauma get in the way of us accessing that space. And it's this kind of deep, intuitive feeling of naturalness that really is it's our inner compass. And we often confuse being ourself with being self-directed or getting our way, which only perpetuates a feeling of separateness. And we get in this cycle of kind of overexerting our dominion, or a feeling of false independence, or further deluding yourself because you're acting from the ego instead of working from one's place of spiritual dharma. Right? I deeply wish to grow no matter what. And if you cultivate in your heart this deep desire to grow no matter what, you take yourself out of this place of being the victim of your own life. And everything starts to be this opportunity to learn and grow and realize who you are. And sometimes it's deeply uncomfortable. But you start to recognize that the universe is conscious and alive and conspiring for you to grow. It's about aligning your desire with something higher and finer. And oftentimes, people think that yoga is about